Welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape, United Methodist Communications and UMC.org's podcast to help us keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. I'm Joy Avino. One of the real perks of my job and getting to do this podcast is having conversations with our bishops from all across the connection. And today I get to share with you a conversation I had with Bishop Patrick Streiff of the Central and Southern European Episcopal area, which covers 12 countries in Europe and 2 in Africa. You are going to enjoy this conversation. Bishop Streiff, welcome to Get Your Spirit in Shape.
Thank you, Joe.
I am talking to you from my home office here in Nashville. Where are you located right now?
At present, I'm here in my Episcopal office in Zurich.
The technology, it's just wonderful that we get to do these things even when we're so far apart.
Yes.
I read in your bio that you were born near Basel, Switzerland. What was it like growing up there?
Yeah, I come originally from the German-speaking part of Switzerland and have grown up there in a family together with one brother who is 2 years older than I, in a nice house together also with grandparents that lived in the same house. And we had a big privilege that there was also a big garden. So we often played as children and invited other children in for playing, which was really very nice.
What was it like having your grandparents live with you? Were they influential in your spiritual and physical development?
These were the parents of my mother. They were very strongly in the United Methodist Church, as was my mother, and that helped me to grow also in the local congregation of the Methodist Church. For me as a small child, it was wonderful to have the grandparents around, and I appreciated them both. For my mother, it was not always so easy because the grandmother was quite a strong woman. And so that gave sometimes a little bit of conflict.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's not always easy, is it, to have your parents living right there with you? So I get the impression that you went to church very early. It was something that your family did throughout your life?
Yes, when it comes to my mother and my grandparents, that's true. So I went very regularly to the Sunday school, which I liked very much, and we had a good time there together. The other element which I have not yet mentioned is that my father has been a scientific person. He came from an originally Catholic background at the time when the Roman Catholic Church was somehow very narrowly minded. And when he talked about his journey, he said, well, he only has heard about saints and all you should do and not do. And so when he grew up and with his studies, he lost more and more contact to the church. But he always allowed my mother to be very active in the church. It was simply something where he had a lot of problems because of how he grew up. But it influenced me also in my growth. I realized it later when I was on studies and I had some study colleagues in the Methodist Church that grew up, what I would say, in a bubble of Methodist churches.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a situation where my father was very, in a good way, also very critical towards the question of faith and God. And my mother, who had, in a positive way, a childlike faith and trust. And you can imagine that for my brother and for me, it was also a kind of challenge. Well, which way to go? And during my teenage years, that has often been for me a question, what is my own way? And really finding my own way in my faith journey.
Was there a moment when you feel like that began to happen for you, that it stopped being kind of like your mom's way, but it was your way in your faith journey?
Well, it was more a progression in my own faith development. Just as an example, we had from time to time a kind of evangelistic meetings of several churches together, sometimes also a kind of youth evangelistic meetings. And somehow when the preacher invited to come forward to give your life to Christ, I never went, and somehow I felt I'm already in that way.
Yeah.
And did not go because somehow I thought, well, Jesus has been with me, but it needs to become more clear. And then at one point, after such an event, driving on my bicycle back home, I thought, oh, should I have gone or not? You can perhaps imagine the situation. All of a sudden, there came a peace in my life. Yes, I know you. It's good. Continue your journey with me. And that has been extremely helpful for me.
It's just remarkable. I had a very similar experience, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people might have had a similar experience. So it's good to hear that.
One other element which was important in that faith journey, somehow I have always been a person that needs some freedom of thought, and also to deal with those who have critical questions. That's the part of my father in me, as there was then also a part of my mother, really trusting God in the way. And on that more critical aspect and questioning about God, I had at one point, I think I was about 15, 16, I went to some free classes on religion that we had at school, where you could join or not. And we read a book from, you would today say, rather liberal German theologian Dorothee Sölle, called Political Theology. And somehow how she presented Jesus and his impact in society just caught my attention, because I realized if faith is something really worth for me and my life, it needs to have an impact in society. Mm-hmm. And then a little bit later, Dom Helder Camara, the bishop from Recife in South America, one of these Catholic bishops working in a kind of liberation theology, came to Switzerland. He came for a big gathering. And that impressed me extremely when he shared how he wants to be a bishop helping for the liberation of his people, and that he moved out of a big palace to be closer to the poor. And when I started then to read a little bit more about Wesley, etc., and the origins of Methodism, I found that there also again. And that somehow confirmed me in, yes, I want to follow Christ. And Christ frees us for a life in love and faith and hope.
You're a bit of a theologian and a historian, I understand. And it seems to me you're an academic, right? You like school, you like being a student. Were you always a good student? And what were your favorite subjects? What did you like to study?
I was always very interested in many things, and I was always a good student. And I think part of it is also that I could grow up in an environment that really valued that and somehow helped me to move forward. And among my favorite subjects in high school was history and English.
Okay.
It was not French, even when I had a lot of French afterwards, but it was English as language and history. And I think when I look back, it was much also, not only, but much linked also to the teachers I had. that were fascinating persons and helped to somehow make things very interesting.
Did you ever consider a different career, or was ministry kind of the path you were on for the majority?
I thought about at one point, before I was really clear about my calling, I thought, well, history, English are things that would be interesting for me to go on for studies. But when I was, don't remember exactly, around 16, 17, perhaps almost 2 years before I finished high school, I was over summer in England, which was for me a very helpful experience with the British Methodist Church and their very strong relationship between words and acts, evangelism and really mission in the society. The church there was much more open to work in the society than I experienced in my congregation in Switzerland. And again, that was kind of fascinating. The faith needs to have an impact in society, and we need to be there for the people. And it needs to have something liberational element in it. And during that time in England, where I was for the first time for 5 weeks away from home, I had to think a lot of time to think about my life. And during that time, it became stronger and stronger, like a very, very small voice telling Patrick, you should become a pastor. I want to call you. And then I thought, oh, how shall I tell that at home to my father? What will he think about it?
Yeah.
And I wrote from England back to him because I thought like that he is a little bit prepared. And then later when I was back and we started to share about it, he said, well, if that's your calling, do it.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and that was somehow very typical, I realized, for him, even when I was afraid before I told him. But somehow it was typical for him. Very open that his son can go a very different way than he went. And later on, we often had in the evening long discussions together about faith, about God, about our journeys. That was wonderful.
Wonderful. I know also that you got a doctorate in your doctoral thesis. It was John William Fletcher, the early Methodist. I don't know that that's a Methodist that a lot of people know about. Can you tell us about him and what got you interested to study him?
Yeah, I really never did other studies. So right away from high school, I went to do the practical year, as we have the tradition in Europe that first you do a full practical year with another pastor before you go to theological studies. And to get a local church that really experience you and that you have some first experiences before you go into theological studies. And then when I went on for theological studies, I realized I will have finished my degree in our Methodist seminary at age 24, so young. And with the possibilities I had, I thought quite early about perhaps going on to a state university and do something more. And that was confirmed somehow on the way. And then I discussed it with two other pastors who were working on a doctorate. And one of them said among the subjects he thought about could be interesting was Fletcher of Madeley. I said, who? I did not know the name, but Fletcher of Madeley came originally from Switzerland, from Nyon at the Lake of Geneva, from a lower nobility family there, and then went to England, had his kind of evangelical conversion experience, listening to a sermon of Charles Wesley, became a friend. They became very close friends, Charles Wesley and he. And he was in England as a kind of tutor to a noble family. And usually these tutors, when they had done their job with children, they received a placement in the Anglican Church as a kind of like active retirement pension.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the noble man where he worked in the family was that kind of donor for a few churches in Shropshire, and he offered Fletcher that he could take over one of these churches. John Wesley would have liked that he became his successor, but Fletcher always refused. That was too high for him. But in theological disputes within the Methodist revival, he became the one who then wrote many theological treatises to explain Wesleyan Arminian theology. And the interesting thing for me was when I did my PhD and was searching for material in Manchester about him, I came in contact with other Methodists, and one from Australia told me, when I said on whom I do the PhD, he said, "Oh, the saint." And it's interesting, for a long time in Methodism, Fletcher was considered the saint of Methodism. And I found that very interesting. The prime theologian after John Wesley, who is at the same time the saint, because he lived so much an exemplary life of holiness, of Christian perfection for the people. And I think that's quite rare, that theologians are also those who live such an exemplary life of love towards other.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about your life as a bishop. I looked up that your Episcopal area covers, is it 14 countries, like 12 in Europe and 2 in Africa? Is that correct?
Yeah, depending, we are not in all as active, but it can go up to 16 countries. It's certainly the most diverse Episcopal area you can have. There are 7 annual conferences, of course, in size, not to compare with a big annual conference in the United States or in Africa, but still 7 of them. Most of them cover more than just one country. So you have legal systems that are very different. You have culture that is very different between East and West. It was the only Episcopal area that has always covered the Western world and the communist Eastern world. And you have countries that are very secular in their culture. You have countries that are very Catholic, like, for example, Poland. Others that are predominantly Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, like Romania or Bulgaria. And you have countries that are 99.8% Muslim, like in Northern Africa. So it's wonderful, diverse situation. And the role of the bishop is much more being someone who connects people and works for the unity of the church in very diverse situations.
That's really interesting. How many languages are represented? Do you have any idea, like across your Episcopal area?
I think that there are probably 20 or more different languages in which a ministry is done, and that's not dialects. So usually in every country you have several of them, and sometimes they overlap. And so in most places where I go, I need translation myself. I have no possibility to know all these languages.
Yeah.
I need the help of translators.
Do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy the close contact with all these different cultures and these different countries?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. I think it gives a richness of experience of the church and of the ministry of the church. And even in Switzerland now, we have much more migrant communities or communities where people come from very different countries. And for me, it's always like a foretaste of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And also of learning to be together, called by Him in a huge diversity of situations and peoples and cultures and backgrounds.
That's a great response. I love hearing that. That's exciting. So when you're not working, and you want to do something just for you, just for fun, just for recreation, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies, interests, anything along those lines?
Yeah. Present since I'm a bishop, of course, that time frame is somehow reduced, but I really try to have such times. And very early, I liked to swim and to be in the water. And then I was a pastor in the French part of Switzerland, always at one of the lakes, which gave me a possibility to swim. I also always liked skiing. And of course, in the beginning, it was downhill skiing. But then I started to discover cross-country skiing. And where we now live is in Biel. It's a little bit north of Bern, of the capital, close to the Jura Mountains. And the Jura Mountains are not very high. So for downhill skiing, it's often difficult because it's only on the top you have enough snow. But for cross-country, it works perfectly. So during winter time, my wife and I, we enjoy on a free day just to go there and for 2 or 3 hours go cross-country skiing. And in summer now, a lot of hiking. Yeah. Because I realize it helps me to move. Otherwise, I'm so much sitting and in so many meetings, and then in between, I need to move. And it helps me also on the stress level to come down and being in nature.
Wonderful. Oh, that's so good to hear. So the final question that I ask every guest of Get Your Spirit in Shape is, what's one way that you keep your spirit in shape?
Here in Europe, we have a strong tradition of the Moravian Watchwords, the daily Moravian words. And since there is internet and email, I even get it, I think, shortly after midnight. But it's really usually one of the very first things I look up in the morning and take a moment to reflect on it, and sometimes look up a larger passage around it. And between the place where we live, close to Bern, and the office in Zurich, it's a good hour train ride in a comfortable, fast train. And that helps me also to have some spiritual time. And then one of the things which really give me always joy and help me is when I have the possibility to meet congregations, to visit congregations, to meet with people. Half of my time, I'm somewhere around, if there is not COVID situation, to travel, to meet people. And then also in local churches, I often ask the people at the coffee, how did you come to this church? Or how did you experience Christ in your life? And these are so fascinating stories. It helps me personally also for my faith. Yes. And I often say a bishop really experiences the worst problems of the church, but also the most wonderful ministries he can see.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, Bishop, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. It has really been a pleasure to get to meet you in this way.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. That was Bishop Patrick Streiff of the Central and Southern Europe Episcopal area of the United Methodist Church. To hear more conversations with our bishops and other leaders of the United Methodist Church, go to umc.org/podcasts and look for this episode of Get Your Spirit in Shape. We've put some links on the page to learn more about Bishop Streiff, and also a transcript of this conversation and my email address so that you can share with me your ideas about Get Your Spirit in Shape. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another conversation that'll help keep our souls as healthy as our bodies. I'm Joe Iovino. Peace.